I've had some Zoom today, so hopefully we'll solve those problems. Thank you guys for being patient. We'll go ahead and get started today. And Rudy's asking me if I can hear you. No, I cannot hear anybody. I show you all as muted.
Testing.
Let me know if you need something. You can put something in chat if necessary. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Let me share my screen. There we go. We're going to take a slight departure from working on our assignment 205, and all of the renderings and everything, though this does feed directly into that part of the course. So don't worry if you feel like it's a departure, because it's going to end up falling back in. But today is the beginning of what I would consider to be some of the really fun stuff that we do in V-Ray, and that's where we start to include artificial lighting. So thus far, we've worked on basically a daylight scene where we eventually put in a sun and an HDRI background, and we have clouds in the sky and whatever. Now we're going to take that and kind of adapt it forward into creating our own lights and adding lighting to the scene. So today is about learning how to make the actual light fixture, and then also how to install the V-Ray the V-Ray light that does the shining. So we're going to depart away, but in the meantime, I want to add kind of some details going forward. So we have 220 today, and we're going to talk about the light fixtures that we're going to be creating. I've also posted your assignment 204. So this is the next and two light fixtures. One is an interior light fixture, the other is an exterior light fixture. So we're doing that interior and exterior light fixture, and we're doing that on purpose. And those light fixtures ideally are going to be light fixtures that you're going to use in your final building in 205. So I'm kind of doubling up, where you get this opportunity to create your light fixtures, and then you'll ultimately be using those in your building. So some of the light fixtures I'll do today, like I'll do a standard recessed light fixture. That's not that exciting in terms of assignment 204. You might want to do a little bit better, a little bit more complicated, but we'll all build that recessed light fixture together, and you'll probably use it a bunch in your model, because we're going to kind of get used to the idea of how we create these lights and or use them. So in 204, you're going to create two light fixtures. One is inside, one is outside. And you're going to ultimately do 4 total renderings. So I need, of each light fixture, I need one rendering that is during the day. And the idea here is that I'm seeing the geometry of the light. I'm seeing the materials that were applied to the light. The light can be on, certainly, but I'm seeing the detail of the light. And then the second rendering is going to be done at night. And we're going to see how the light casts on the wall, on the floor, etc. So you're going to actually install a light and see how it's working and progressing. So there'll be, of each light fixture, there'll be an interior and an exterior light fixture, and there'll be a daytime and a nighttime rendering of each. That means there'll be 4 total renderings due as part of this assignment. So I'm expecting for this assignment, and it's due on Wednesday, May 4th. So it's still a ways out, 3 weeks or so. You'll be working on this. So they're meant to kind of fill in your assignment 205. They're meant to be necessary in your 205, but at the same time, they're kind of a standalone deal. So we'll jump back over into exercise 220 here. This is where we're learning to build the materials that are necessary. We're learning to build the light fixtures. We're learning to install the V-Ray lights. And as such, I have right here a sample file of a night environment. So I've already pre-set up a night environment for you so that you can just drop your light fixture in and see how it works. So that'll be something that you'll use today. So you probably want to go ahead and on exercise 220 here, right click on it and say save link as. And make sure you're saving this into your folder for today, which I've already done. It's there. And you'll do that. Sometimes you have to choose keep, so don't forget about that as well. When we start thinking about light fixtures, we want to first think about the geometry of the fixture itself. And what I mean by a fixture is this is the thing that's going to hold the light bulb, so to speak. So how are we going to model that, what it's going to look like, etc. So let's start with something simple. I'm going to go ahead and open up a brand new Rhino file. And I'm going to choose under new, I'm going to choose large object inches as my template. And we'll work in the perspective view. And what I'm going to start by creating is a can light. So this would be a recessed light that's up in the ceiling. And so we'll create that light first. Now, I don't need to create the whole can. I don't need to create everything that's up inside the ceiling. I just need to create the part that we see. And so if you look around your room, you may see some of these recessed can lights. You may get an idea of what they look like, or you can just follow along with me as I start to create it. So I'm going to start by using a circle. And we'll start with that circle at 0.00. And I want the diameter of my circle to be 4 inches. So I'll go ahead and set that at 4 inches. We could select it and then type Z, enter for zoom, followed by S, enter for selected. And we get a nice view of that can light. So the idea here is that the can light would be 4 inches. I need a little bit of trim going around the outside. So let's do an offset of maybe 3/4 of an inch. There's my little offset. And so I could actually take these two and I could extrude them. So let me select both of these curves and I could go to my surface and I could choose to extrude curve straight. Now I want this to be solid. So I'm going to come over here and choose solid, yes. And I'm going to imagine ceiling. So I actually want the geometry to be a little bit negative. So I want it to go down from that flat plane. So let's say negative 0.25 inches. And that then creates it. Let's look here at a shaded view so we can see that ring that we just created. And again, it looks like it went positive instead of negative. Let me look. I probably had the mouse in the wrong direction. Yep, it went up. So let's move it. I'm going to do that move in the perspective view here. And sorry, I have to choose vertical. So let's move vertical, negative 0.25 inches. There it is. Now we can see it in the front view. It's definitely down there. So the next, and I could create the lens using just like a flat circle here, but I could also add a little bit to it. So let's go over here into my presets. And let's come over here to the ellipsoid. I have some options that we can look at. It looks like I have an ellipsoid from the center. I have an ellipsoid by diameter. Let's do the ellipsoid by diameter. So it's going to ask me for the start of the first axis. I'm going to turn on, let's see, my end snap, my quadrant snap. And let's turn on perpendicular as well. Oops, not intersection, perpendicular. So I can come over here. I'm snapping to this quadrant. Second point of the axis would be straight across there. Then I'd come to the opposite side. And again, we want to snap to perpendicular there. And now I have my third axis. So this is how big I want it to be. Now, if I wanted it to stick down, obviously I could make it bigger, but I really don't want it to stick down too much. So I might choose maybe just to be the thickness of this trim. So I'll come over here and reference that line. And there's a little bit of a disc there on the bottom. I don't actually need the top part. So I could delete that. And I can do that by creating a rectangular plane and using that as a trim. So let me select it. I'll type trim and I'll get rid of that piece. And I can delete my rectangular plane. And there it is. So you can see it's kind of a half of a dome, right, like that. So this, in a nutshell, is a very, very basic setup for a light fixture. If I wanted to get more complicated, I could spend more time on the trim. I could, for example, draw the profile of the trim. So let's say that this is flat And let's say that I want to go 16th, and then we'll come back over. Let me turn on ortho here to help me out. 1/8. Yeah, I like it better at 1/16. And let's go 1/16. 1/16. Sorry, like I said, my Zoom has been acting up. I just had trouble with the connection there. And let's do another 1/16. And then we'll come across. Maybe about like that. And then we'll come back together. And then maybe I'll use a fillet this time. Let me do a fillet radius of 1/16. And we could fillet this to that. That's going to round that part of it. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm saying, oh, you know what? Let me create the profile of this. So let me do a rotate 3D and I'll fold it down. Oops, come on. And there it is. And then it's a sweep. We did before. So I could do a sweep 1. There's my rail. There's my cross-sectional curve or my sweep shape. And I could build that out. And now that has a little bit more finesse to it because it's got the little baffles or whatever. So you can obviously increase and start to tweak the settings so that it looks better to you. Once we've established this light, we need to start organizing on a layer. We're going to be using this as a block, so the more organized it is, the better. So I might use my default layer, and let's call that 4-inch can light. Let's do a sublayer on that for my lens. And let's do a sublayer for the trim. The rest of these don't matter, so we'll take all of them and delete them. And then let's go ahead and put the lens on the lens layer. So I'll right click on lens and say change object layer. I'll select the trim, I'll right click and I'll say change object layer. Sounds good. Now I don't need these original curves. They can stay there, but I really don't need them. So let's go ahead and delete those like that. So now we have to start thinking about materials. So let me open up V-Ray. I think my current renderer is already set. Let's go to render, current renderer, it's set for V-Ray. Let's open up the V-Ray asset editor right here. Let's go to our materials. Actually, let's go to our pre-made materials. And let's come down here. I'm going to go to plastic. And how about plastic white? So I'll take that and I will right click and choose to add to scene. And then I'm going to right click on this plastic and I'm going to say apply to layer, can light, trim. So if I were to switch this over into my rendered view, we should see that that's kind of a plastic trim. Now, in V-Ray, we have two ways of kind of working through the light material itself. So, and this is a little bit daunting at first. If we want something to glow from a material standpoint, we need to create a material that actually glows. So this is going to mimic the bulb itself. So if you look up in your room, if you look up at the light fixtures or whatever, if you were to look at them, you'd see the lens of the light. It's either the lens that covers the light bulb or the bulb itself. And that emits some light. So when we look at it, it's kind of a bright white spot. That needs to be created as part of this geometry of the light fixture. And we'll create that in just a second. The other half of it, though, is the light that does the casting of light and shadows, and that's going to happen in the final scene. So there's two components to this. The first one, this material that represents the light bulb, is going to be called an emissive material. It's a material that emits light. It's not good enough to light a whole scene with, but it mimics the bulb itself. So we need to actually create this material. Now I have a link to how this whole thing works. So right here we have V-Ray 8.15 emissive material. So we can right click and go to new tab. I'm going to have to reference it a little bit because I don't remember all of these values as we create it. Once you create it, you can export it and use it again. But let's go ahead and mimic it. So first thing we'll do, we'll come over here. We're going to click the new asset, and we're going to create under render, under light materials. Sorry, we're going to choose an emissive material. So far we've always chose generic materials. We're going to go ahead and create an emissive material. It's called emissive. I'm going to change this and call and make it called lens, or maybe light lens, or something like that. Let's take a look at that material. You can see that it's kind of glowing. So under here we have a layer called color. We can change the color itself. So the color, and like I said, I have to reference this. The emissive color is 200, 161, and 82. So let's come back here, and we need our range to go from 0 to 255. So we can actually type these values in. 200, 161, and 82. And it makes it kind of this yellowy brown color. Don't worry that it looks kind of yellowy brown here. When we turn up the intensity, it'll get more white. So let's just double check my settings. 200, 161, and 82. 161 and 82. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And that's our new color. Next thing here is we have a transparency color. So let me go ahead and click on that color. And again, I'll reference these. The emissive transparency is 100s across the board. So we're going to do an RGB value of 100, 100, and 100. Okay. Now that's set. Let me double check here. I've got a couple other things. I've got a diffuse color and a diffuse transparency. Those are actually now set by default. So we don't need to worry about those like we used to. So we're going to go with this. However, the last thing that I need to do is I need to adjust the intensity. And so right now the intensity is set at 1. If I change the intensity here, if V-Ray will let me, sorry, my connection seems to be having an issue. All right, well, sorry about that. My internet decided that it was unhappy, or Zoom or something. So everything crashed. Hopefully you guys can still hear me okay, and I will try to bring everything back up. Okay, so hopefully you can still see it. By the way, I had the caffeine running, and by having the caffeine application running, like I talked about last time, when I logged back into the remote desktop, I got the same computer back, which is a good little trick just in case something were to happen and it crashed like that. So anyway, what I was starting to say is that we're going to take the intensity value and we're going to up it to 100 rather than, and I'll go light bulb turned on here in the preview. So that's good. So let's take our light lens. Let me right click on it and say apply to layer, and it's going to go to the lens material like that. So this light is now done and ready to use. So let's go ahead and save it. I'll go to File and I'll go to Save. Now I tend to put these in my OneDrive folder under Resources so that I can use them again and again. For our purposes today, I'm going to go ahead and put them in my Artist Retreat folder. And let's create a new folder for fixtures. And I'll go ahead and call this 4-inch can light. And I'll click Save. So I was very careful in my organization. I've got my materials assigned. I've saved this. Now I need to go ahead and open up that rendered file, the night scene, the sample night scene that I downloaded. So there it is. Let's go ahead and open that up. And what you'll see here is that I have kind of a wall and a roof and an infinite plane and kind of a background. If I were to render this right now, it would turn out almost completely black because it's meant to be at night. So let's bring in that light fixture. I'm going to create a little bit of geometry to help myself out. I'm going to draw a line diagonally across this roof. And then when I go to my edit blocks, insert block instance, I'll browse for that file I just saved. So let me go into my folder. And there's that light fixture that I just created. Let me go ahead and say open. So we see it. I'm going to do this linked as we've been doing. I'll say OK. I'll say OK again. And if I were to snap this to the midpoint of this ceiling right there, I'd end up with a little can light on the ceiling. Let me zoom out a little bit and then we can see it. So if I were to render this, then go ahead and click on the render icon. We're going to see that bright white light that represents the lens itself. But you can also see that it's really not casting much real light on the scene. So the lens is just meant to mimic what the light looks like, not to actually do the casting of light. We need to create a V-Ray light to actually do the casting light. And remember that V-Ray light has to be created in the final scene. If you're working on your retreat file and you put all of these blocks into your retreat base file, that's great. But the actual V-Ray lights have to be in the master site file. It's just one of the quirks. So we're going to create a V-Ray light that mimics what's happening from this light here. And we're going to do that using what's called a spotlight. It's the closest thing to this style light that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and click on spotlight here. And it's going to ask me first for the base of the cone. This is where do we want to start the cone. And so I want to start it right in the center. Let me come in here. I'm going to turn on maybe my center snap so I can snap to the center. For me, come on. There we go. I'm going to snap right. The radius is equal to the height. So my radius is set to 1 foot. There it is, and I'll hit enter. And my height should then also be set to 1 foot. Now it's hard to actually specify the height in the perspective view. So I'm going to do it in this front view here. And I'm going to make sure that I'm not snapping to anything, and I type in 1 foot, and there it is. So this has a radius of 1 foot and a diameter and a height of 1 foot. Now it's currently inside of this building because of the way I created it. I need to move it down. So I can type in move. This might also be a good place for the gumball. And we're going to place it so that it's just below where my light fixture is. So it can be really close. It could be that close, for example, but it can't be up here. It can't be inside any of these shapes because it's not going to shine through those shapes. So it just needs to be close. So I have that installed. Let me go back to my render 1 view. Let me go to set view, render 1. I set this up for you so you can jump back to this view for the rendering. And let's look at the properties of this light. So let me come over here to properties and we'll see, okay, here's some information about the light. So first off, we've got color. So let's change that color. I'm going to click on the little color icon here. And this is a color that I've actually memorized. It's an RGB value. It's 255, 214, and 170. And 170. And that represents kind of a standard light color. So I have that 255, 270. We'll go ahead and say OK. My intensity, we're going to change that. But first, we want to change the units. So by default, the units are in scalar. I like to use radiant power, because that's how we think of light bulbs. So radiant power as my units mean that I can type in the wattage of the bulb that I want. So I could use a 100-watt bulb, I could use a 60-watt bulb, I could use a 70-watt bulb, 75, whatever. We would type that in. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at 100 right now. So I've got that set. My units are in radiant power. The rest of these we're not going to worry about. We can also see this light setting in the V-Ray asset editor. So if I could click on the button to open it in the V-Ray asset editor. We could see there's my spotlight, right? We could open the drawer to the right side here and we could get further information about it. So I did the easy settings over here. We already did the color, but I could do it inside of the V-Ray asset editor, right? The other thing we want to make sure that's set, and it is set this way by default, is that the decay is inverse square, which is good. I believe that I can also rename the light if I wanted to. So I could rename this to be, can light 1. If that helps you keep track of what your various lights are and their settings. So let's take a look at the rendering. Now that we have the light installed, let's go ahead and click on the render button. And unlike last time where we only saw the little white disc, we're seeing the white disc, but you can also see that our light is being cast down in our scene. We're getting an arc that's appearing on the wall. That's how the light is cast on the wall. And we're getting a circle on the floor. So this is an approximation of what a can light would look like if it was shining in a particular scene. Now the geometry of this V-Ray light also matters. So we just did this in the radius is equal to the height. Let me show you what happens if we change that. So let me create a new light. Again, it's going to be a V-Ray spotlight here. I'm going to turn on my point snap in the hopes of using this as an example. Let me change the diameter. So this time the diameter would be 2 feet, or excuse me, the radius would be 2 feet. So it's twice what it was. I'm going to snap again to that point, and this is my new light. Let's take the old light here. Let's hide it. Alternatively, if I didn't want to hide it, I could also go into my V-Ray asset editor, can light 1, and I could. I thought I could turn it off. There it is. See, if I click the little icon, I can actually turn it off. So that might be useful. Okay, so my second one is this one. It's the spotlight. I could call this one can light 2. I could also name it wide, just so that we know what this is. Once again, I'll change the color. So this is 255, 214, 170. I need to change the range here to 255. There we go. 255, 214, and 170. All right, I've got my color. I'm going to change my units again into radiant power. It's now 100 watt, just like it was, and my decay is set for inverse square. All of those are good. Let's go ahead and render it now. Now notice the last one had an arc down here. Give it a second to build its render tree. And it crashed. How nice. And of course, I didn't save it, did I? Nope. So lots of technical problems. So you get to watch me do it one more time. Save frequently and often. All right. So let me insert that one again. Edit blocks, insert block instance. Browse. All kinds of technical problems today. All right, so let's link it as a reference. And let's snap it right to the middle. There it is. Let's save this before I mess it up. And then let's add a spotlight there. This was going to be my 2 foot. And I need to create the 1 foot. We're going to do it here in the front view. And then remember, this has to be below the light fixture. There it is. It doesn't have to be really close to it. It just needs to be reasonably close. So there it is. Let me do the settings again so I can open my V-Ray asset editor. There's my spotlight. We can call this Can Light 2 wide. Just so you know what it is. Can Light 2 wide. Let's look at our settings. I'm going to open the drawer to the right. Color is going to be 255, 214, and 170. This just adds a little bit of yellow to the light. We're going to change our to radiant power. Our decay is set for inverse square. I'm going to go ahead and save this before I render. Go to File and then Save. And then let's try that render again. So the last time my arc was much lower and much steeper. This time I'm up here and the arc is higher and it's much more diffuse lighting. It's not as sharp. There's not a sharp circle on the ground. So the alternate to that, and again, I'm showing you all these as examples, is let me come back and create a spotlight that's the opposite. So we'll do a 1 foot diameter spotlight, that one there. Let's go into my V-Ray asset editor. This is my new one. This is Can Light 3 dash, oops, Can Light dash 3 narrow. Just for our reference. Color 255, 214, and 170. And once again, we're going to do radiant power at 100, inverse square. All of that looks good. Let's save it. And I'm going to turn off the Can Light wide. The alternative to that would be I could actually take the wide can light like this and I could type hide so it goes away and that would turn it off as well. And let's go ahead, let me save it one more time and let's render it. So with the super wide, we had a wide arc here. Now when it gets narrower, it becomes even more like a flashlight where we have a really bright spot and then it doesn't fall off at nearly as much. So it's just a different look. I've found in practice that the even ratio, the 1 foot radius by the 1 foot height, is about what you're after. So that's my favorite. I'm going to go ahead. I'll stop the render for right now. Let me turn back on my Can Light 2 because I like that one better. Let's go ahead and show it. Show. And I'm going to hide the narrow one. Like that. So this one's not as good as the same ratio, but you don't need to watch me recreate it again. So these are all spotlights. Now, what about if we wanted to create, like, say, a lamp or a wall light? Well, that's a different set of geometry. So let's save this for right now. And let's jump back to here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I'll go to File and then New. Large object inches. And this time, maybe I'm going to build a floor lamp. So my objects are going to end up being relatively simple, but you guys can spend some more time kind of evolving them. So let's do a cylinder. I'm going to start at 0, 0. And let's do a radius of 6 inches. And let's do a height of 1 inch. Let me, excuse me, switch over into shaded mode so we can see it. There it is. Let me do a little pole here. So I'm going to do another cylinder. And let me snap to the center. There it is. And my diameter is going to be 0.75. And my height is, I don't know, maybe 5 feet. Now I need to create the lamp shade. So let's see. I'm going to do something, a truncated cone like this. So let's start. And if I wanted, I could also type in 0, 0, 5 feet as my starting place. Sometimes that's easier. And then let's see here. Let's do a diameter of, I don't know, 1 foot. Let's do a height. Let's do, I don't know, another foot. And let's do my upper diameter at 8 inches. There it is. So I want it to be open at the top and the bottom. So let me go ahead and type explode. And then I could delete the top and the bottom here. Let me take those two and I'll type delete. And now I've deleted those two. So I could, of course, add some more detail to this. But let's talk about what ultimately is going to be happening here. So in this scenario, right, we're going to have a light in the center of this, and it's going to be casting light out through the shade and down onto the floor and theoretically up above. So this shade is going to glow a little bit. So we need a material that's going to glow as part of that shade. This material is some kind of metal or whatever. So let's make our layers. So we can make a layer for floor lamp. We can make a sublayer for shade. We can make a sublayer for stand. And we don't need these other pieces. We'll go ahead and delete those. So let me take the stand and put it on the stand layer. Let me take the shade and put it on the shade layer. There we go. Now, in this particular case, unless I'm like looking very vertically or very up at it, I'm really not going to see the bulb. So I don't really need an emissive lens. You could do it, but it's not really necessary. So let's look at the materials. Let me open my V-Ray materials here. Let's look at metal. And sure, why not? Let's use the anodized champagne. Let's apply, let's add to the scene. I'm going to right click and say apply to layer, stand. Now, if I needed to texture map, I would texture map. Now for the shade, this one starts to get a little bit challenging. So we could go into fabric, for example. We don't want carpet, but we could pick some kind of a curtain transparent, maybe something like this. Let's try it and see. I'm going to right click on it and say add to scene. And then I'm going to right click and say apply to layer, shade. Now I don't know exactly how this is going to turn out. And so this is part of the experimentation process. The other option is I can create my own material. But let's take a look at this one and let's see how it plays out. So I'm going to close this. We'll save this file. I'll go to File and then Save. And this is going to be a floor lamp. And this is part of the process. We want to do this to experiment and see what turns out, what looks good. Let me bring back into the night scene here. And this time I'm going to bring it in as a block reference, just like I did last time. So I'll go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. We're going to browse for the floor lamp. We'll say Open. We're going to link as a reference. We'll say OK. Say OK. Now I'm going to snap it right there to that corner. And then I'm going to move it around. So maybe I'll move it in the top view because that'll be a little bit easier. Let's go to Move. Again, you could do this with a gumball if you wanted to. Let me move it over just a little bit. And there's my lamp. So let's look at it again in render 1. There it is. Now I need to install a light fixture here. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new light bulb. Now, if I were doing a spotlight, it only shines in one direction, just like this. But this needs to shine in multiple directions. So in this case, the best light to use is the point light tool. So I'm going to use the point light tool here. And I'm going to snap it to the center, I hope, of my, right there. I would also like this to move down. So I snapped it to the center. Now I'm going to move it vertically by 6 inches so that it's in the middle of my lampshade. Perfect. So let's take that light and adjust the settings of it. Let me save it in the meantime. I'm afraid of a crash. Let me open up my V-Ray asset editor. We can see our Omni light, our point light is and I saved it. I think maybe it's the weather that's causing everything to get unstable. So let me rename this. We'll call this floor lamp light 1. Now, same thing. Under color here, 255, 214, and 170. Perfect. There's my color. We're going to change my units into watts. And my decay is going to be set for inverse square, just like it was before. We can close this. Let me save it one more time. And let's jump back to the render 1 view. So there it is. And let's take a look. I'm actually going to hide these two just so that they're not confusing what we're seeing. And what is this? Did I move that? I know. Hold on. I think I might have accidentally moved it. I think I created a duplicate light here. Get rid of that. Okay. So let's go ahead and do another test render. So one more time, I'm going to save before just in case. And then we'll go ahead and do our test render. Okay, so we can see here that it's casting the light rather nicely, right? We end up with a nice arc on the floor here. We end up with a nice circle on the ceiling where we're getting some diffuse light, but I'm not super happy with the shade itself. So like I said, that was an experiment. Let's jump back to my original file here, and let's work on something different. So I had used a transparent curtain. Let's create just a new material. So I'm going to go up to my materials, create a new generic. And I'm going to call this lampshade. It helps if I can type correctly. Lampshade. Let's make the color kind of a lampshady tan color. If you're struggling to get a particular color, you just kind of have to play through, I think somewhere in about there is about right. I'm not going to worry about textures and that sort of thing, but I am going to worry about opacity here. I'm going to change this opacity slider. Let's go to maybe 0.5. It's about halfway. I bet it's going to be even less. Let's go 0.2. Then let's go ahead and apply the lampshade to the shade layer. You know what? It might be the opposite. It might be 0.8. Just trying to remember how I created it last time. Where solid. Let's try that and see. I'll go to File and then Save. We'll jump back over here. And again, this is the value of using the block references because we can go back to our Edit, Blocks, Block Manager. Linked file is newer. Let's go ahead and update that. It's going to update the materials for me. And we can see that reflected over here where it's changed the shade color. And let's go ahead and render it again. I actually like the look a little bit better than with the transparent, but it's still not shining through enough for me. So I'm going to change that opacity. So I'll jump back here. We'll go back to my lampshade, the opacity. Let's try it at 0.4. Let's go ahead and save it. We'll jump back here. Go to Edit, Blocks, Block Manager. And we will update. There we go. We can stop this render and start again. And it's better. I think it needs just a little bit more. So this is where you have to just keep fine tuning. So we jump back there. And let's drop that down to 0.2, maybe. Close it. We'll save it. Update. And we can try another render. So the idea is that you keep going back and forth until you get the look that you're after. Now remember, the other thing that I could do is on the shade material. Not that render. Yeah, it's getting better each time. I may have to drop that even further. But the other thing that we could do is we could change the shade material to, say, be perforated. So we could jump back here, and on this material, we could go and load something that has little perforations in it. I don't know that any of the presets do. I have one in my V-Ray materials that I've saved from before. It's available on the course website. Let me go. It should have been meshes and screens. There we go. You guys actually saw the yellow plastic coated one before. Let's go the round hole screen. And it may not. Let's see the diffuse. Here's the opacity. I think it's missing its file. Yeah, hold on a second. Let me reload that. There's the transparency. And it'd be nice if it was showing us the preview. Yeah, okay. Well, we'll try applying it and see. I'm going to disable the reflection because I don't want there to be a reflection on it. Delete that reflection. Ah, yes, now I'm seeing. You can see that little bit of mesh. I may want to adjust the diffuse color. Right now it's kind of a dark. We could go back to where it was, something a little bit lighter, maybe like that. You see all those holes. Anyway, all that being said, let's apply this to my shade layer. But if I was doing this, I really need to look at the texture mapping of it. So let's look at my rendered view. And then let's go into my texture mapping. Let's apply a cylindrical map to it. So we use a bounding box, world. And do we want it to be capped? No. And let's do x equals y equals z. Okay. It's not previewing particularly well, but let's go ahead and save it and see how it turns out in the final version here. So there we are. Let's go into edit, blocks, block manager. We'll update this again. Did I not apply it? Hold on a second. Yep, this screen's applied. It didn't look like it took here in my materials. Shade, why did that not update? Not sure. Let's just override this. Modify reference layers. Let's render it and see if it applied anyway. No, it didn't. That's odd. So obviously things happen to me too. Let's apply it directly to this object and see if that makes a difference. Apply to selection. Let's save it. Block manager. Update it. Oh, of course, now it updates. Okay, so let's do another render. That may have been why my transparency wasn't showing up here. Really? Crashed again. So clearly this is my day. But you guys definitely get the idea of what I was after. So what we're looking for is to create today 2 light fixtures. Ideally, they would be the precursors to what you're going to end up doing in your assignment 204. We're not putting them into the scene today. We're going to do that next class. So this is about the sample scene, sticking them in, making sure that you can create the lights. The only 2 styles of lights that I'm going to have you work with today are the Omni light, where it's going in all directions, and the spotlight. Those are the 2 I want you to concentrate on. We will cover other types of lights. We'll do rectangular lights in a couple lectures, but I want you to concentrate on those 2. Concentrate on building the fixture, the part that is doing the holding of the light bulb, and then bring it into the scene and add the V-Ray light to it. I will try, if I can, to do that one last render so you can see that, but I know it's noon, so some of you have to go. So if you bear with me, you're free to go. That's great, thank you. If not, I'm going to try to open up that file one more time and finish that render. So just so you can see it with that. And I apologize for the technical issues today.
Well, thank you for class.
Thank you, Professor.
All right. So let's save this one more time. Actually, I just opened it, so it shouldn't matter. Let's go ahead and render it. Yeah, there we go. So my texture mapping might not be right, but you see that I was able to create that pattern here, and which is then casting the shadow on the wall. So I can use the V-Ray material with the holes in it to actually do this, right? To create these patterns on the wall or what have you. So experiment and play around with the V-Ray material until you get the results that you want. I'm going to go back and try reapplying the lighter material to this. It was the lampshade. Apply to layer. Let's apply to selection. And save it just to see if it glows better, because maybe it wasn't updating. All right. Edit, blocks, block manager. And let's update this one. Okay. Let's go ahead, stop the render. Let's re-render it. Yep, it just wasn't updating the material. So I'm not quite sure why it was doing that. I'll have to investigate that a little bit further. But yeah, now that I adjusted the transparency, we're getting a nice glow out of this lampshade, which is ultimately what we were after as part of this, this overall design. Okay, so I'll let you go at this point. Again, today is about creating those light fixtures. I hope you have fun with this. There's something about creating the artificial light that starts to get really fun. So take your time, sort it out, get used to the settings. I know it's a lot of numbers to remember, but write them down as you start to create these lights. And then next class will actually in your scene and start to have artificial lighting as part of your building. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, be focusing on how to direct the light and less about the light fixture design. It's kind of both. We want a good quality light fixture, but we also want the light fixture to be shining the correct direction and to be casting shadows and whatever. So it's kind of a combination of both. For the assignment, you can, this is for the assignment, not for the assignment, you can put it in your final scene and render it in your final scene, or if you feel like it shows better in the sample scene here, you could use the sample scene as well. Okay, so I will let you guys go. For those of you that have check-ins today, I'll be back at 12:10 to start those check-ins. We are having check-ins as normal, so you'll get your same credit this week for coming to the check-ins. If you have any questions and want to ask them and stick around, that's fine. If not, I'll see you during your check-ins.